A while back, I saw a post that said something to the effect of, "It's not that the fans are tired of new Pokémon variants and forms, just that Gen 1 gets everything." Quite the claim, although it certainly feels like it most times, but is this really accurate? Does Gen 1 actually have that much presence throughout the series? These questions got me thinking a bit more broadly. How much does each generation borrow from their past titles? And which mons actually get the most representation across the years? Well, I decided to comb through all 1,288 Pokémon to see who's on Game Freak's good side. For those of you who are itching to call me out, I'm sure you noticed that number is a lot larger than the accepted 1028. That's because I didn't just count each Pokémon as they appeared, but also their variants. I consider a variant an alternative form, or battle gimmick that either changes a Pokémon's type, stat, or appearance. The 4 Oricorios each get an entry as they are distinct from one another, while Zenmo Darmanitan does not, as its change is due to an ability. This also means that Z-moves, Dynamax, and Terastallization are out, as any Pokemon can use them and they don't actually really change anything. Now, to help me figure out what makes up each generation, I look for what I call a branch. This is an extension or inspiration from a previously released mon. Politoed would be a branch because it was introduced later and points back to Poliwag. Poliwrath, however, doesn't, as both it and the Wag debuted in Gen 1. I then attributed these branches to its earliest ancestry. With the Poliwag example, I noted in my datasheet that Politoed came from Wag. And with that, let me show you some numbers, starting with... Generation 1 introduced the world to the original 151 pocket monsters, but there isn't really anything to say. Being the foundation has its advantages, but this also means we have to take their 100% uniqueness score with a grain of knackly. So, properly starting with Generation 2, we have 100 new fellows to peek at, but only 19 branches to analyze. Crobat is our first, and part of the Zubat family. Then we get a nice little run of babies, being Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, Smoochum, Elekid, Magby, and Tyrogue. Speaking of, this dude lets us group Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, and add Hitmontop to the party. Bellossom, Politoed, Espeon, Umbreon, and Slowking all gave us alternative evolutions, while Steelix, Scizor, Kingdra, Porygon 2, and Blissey just get stapled to the end. Overall, this makes Gen 2 81% unique. Now, things get a bit interesting as Gen 3 added 141 Pokémon, with only 2% of them coming from elsewhere, these being Azurill and Wynot. Funny how the Gen All About Babies missed a couple. With the biggest hit to uniqueness we've seen, Gen 4 only has 78%. Almost an even split amongst the other 3 generations, even though this gen brought the second highest amount post-Kanto. A few more infants were added to the mix with Happiny, Mime Jr., Munchlax, Mantike, Bonsly, Chingling, and Badoo, who also gave us a new Evo for Roselia in Roserade. Speaking of new Evos, we got Leafeon, Glaceon, Electivire, Licky, Magmortar, Magnezone, Porygon Z, Rhyperior, Tangrowth, Ambipom, Gliscor, Mismagius, Honchkrow, Weavile, Mamoswine, Togekiss, Yanmega, Dusknoir, Probopass, Gallade, and Frostlass. Our weirdest and final addition is Regigigas. He isn't technically part of an existing line, but his lore implicates him as being the father of all Regis, so I'll just start pointing back to them as a group. Now with a beautiful return to its roots, we see our first generation in a while with no references. Unova has a perfect 100% uniqueness, tying it with Kanto. From this point forward, things get interesting. Gen 6 introduced us to our first major battle gimmick, Megas. Additionally, it provided us with remakes that added said gimmick. This means a lot of new mons, and a lot of hits against Kalos. We see Megas for Venusaur, Charizard, Blastoise, Beedrill, Pidgeot, Alakazam, Slowbro, Gengar, Kangaskhan, Pinsir, Gyarados, Aerodactyl, Mewtwo, Ampharos, Scizor, Heracross, Houndoom, Tyranitar, Blaziken, Gardevoir, Mawile, Aggron, Medicham, Manectric, Bayonet, Absol, Garchomp, Lucario, Abomasnow, Sharpedo, Camerupt, Altaria, Glalie, Salamence, Metagross, Latios, Rayquaza, Lopunny, Gallade, and Audino. We also got primals of Kyogre and Groudon, although those are basically just Megas. Sylveon is our only non-gimmick Pokemon, although Arceus does now have access to the Fairy typing. I do need to make note of Cosplay Pikachu, which helps spawn in 6 more dudes. This leaves us with an astounding 59% for poor Kalos, as both the main line and remake were mostly taken over by Kanto and Hoenn. Generation 7 sees that number tick back up as the only branches added are from the new regional variants. Of course, these are all mods from Kanto. All said and done, this leaves Alola at a cool 87% uniqueness. Of course, Galar couldn't just have a cast of regional pocket monsters. Oh no, they also needed a battle gimmick that adds even more mons to the count. As I said, Dynamax doesn't count as it only scales up your dudes, but Gigantamax does, as for some Pokemon it does change the look. But getting back to regional forms, we have a nice twofer with Galarian and Hisuian mons. It's interesting how so many come from Unova of all places. And with noble Pokemon from Legends Arceus, we also get some new Evos in Weirdeer, Kleavor, Ursaluna, Basculegion, Sneasler, and Overquill. Also, another funky case here, we have an Amoris, who gets lumped in with the other Therian Pokemon. We can't skip over the new family members from Galar either. Mr. Rhyme, Obstagoon, Berserker, Cursula, and Sirfetch'd. Even with everything Gen 8 brings to the table, they're still losing 20% to Cantonian mons, several pieces to other gens, and ending up with a paltry 63%. Before giving you the Paldea numbers, I do want to mention Gen 10 real quick. I did count Brout, Pombon, and Gekba in my numbers, but to say that Gen 10 is 100% unique ain't quite right. I mean, we've only seen 3 guys, and it's not really a lot to go on. But hey, look forward to a part 2 once we get the full decks revealed. Getting back to Gen 9, we have a handful of Convergent Evolutions, but let's be honest, it's just a fancy name for a regional form. Toadscool, Wooper, and Tauros, just name a few, but here's the rest. We also see the Paradox forms, both past and future. I'd like to say it's a good spread, but everything here is from either Gen 5 or sooner. Of course, we can't talk about the 9th generation without mentioning all the new Megas. Gives quite a lot of love to those mons of Kalos. And who could forget our trip to Kitakami? Now, I unfortunately have to share the bad news. With the second worst score, Gen 9 ends with a uniqueness of only 60%. So, after all that, what does the representation really look like? Well, that post wasn't entirely wrong. Gen 1 does get the most representation across the board. To be fair, it's the first and the one almost all people think of when you mention Pokémon. However, it would seem over the years that each other generation does get more and more rep with each new title. Except Sinnoh for some reason, which my favorite gen, but oh well. The other big question to answer still is, which Poké Monster is the favorite? Well, here are the top represented lines from each generation. Sprigatito, Applin, Rowlet, Gumi, Darumaka, Gible, Ralts, Sneasel, Pikachu. And here are the top 10 across all time. Roselia, Sneasel, Snorunt, Zigzagoon, Ralts, Diglett, Slowpoke, Meowth, Eevee, and unsurprisingly, Pikachu. Given everything I'm seeing from this data, I do worry how much Wind and Waves will borrow. Especially with the rumored battle gimmick, I'm sure our usual Cantonian suspects will receive those new toys without question. However, given that almost 50% of Generation 1 mons haven't been touched since their initial release, some hopefully new faces will get a chance to shine again. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video. It took quite a while to assemble and work through this data. So if you want to see more videos like this, consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel. If you have any suggestions, please let me know down in the comments. But until next time, stay cuddly, my friends.